What's up, YouTube? Mark with Kardavox Academy here, and today I'm pumped for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, it's just a good day. It's good weather, and here in Arizona, that's always a plus. But you're sitting there saying, Mark, don't fucking talk to me about the weather. We don't care about the weather. We care about Aborted, and that's what I'm here to talk about. Today, we are going to be checking out the new song Dreadbringer by Aborted. And I'm very pumped because in just a little bit, we're going to be pulling on Sven, the vocal icon, to talk to us about his approach, his vocal stylings, all of these things. And it's sure to be a ton of fun. I'm very excited about it. Now, if you're new to the channel, again, my name is Mark. I've been a metal vocalist for about 14 years. I'm in a band called Kardavox. We're on Metal Blade Records. Released an album 2 years ago. Wow. It's a long time. And I'm also a full-time vocal teacher. I teach people how to make all sorts of crazy sounds, stuff like, you know, safely and efficiently, so they don't hurt themselves and they can follow their metal vocal journey and dreams. And that's pretty much it. If you like the content, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. I'm tired of hearing myself. So let's go ahead. Let's pull Sven in. Here we go. All right. So we've got Sven here, the vocalist of Aborted. What's up, man? How you doing today?
How's it going? Yeah, not bad. Winding down after a long ass day of work and ready to talk vocals.
Yeah, I'm excited. And you told me that you just got back from quite a busy last, what was it, couple of months. You were 70,000 tons of metal. Where else were you just recently? You mentioned it, but my brain is off.
Yeah, we just did a couple shows in Mexico right before. Then we did the 70,000 tons of metal, and then a headline show in Bogota in Colombia right after. So it was quite the trek. A lot of flying.
Yeah,
and sailing.
You've been busy. We'll put it that way. Not to mention, pardon me. Not to mention, you know, you've got an album drop coming up. We heard one single today. We're going to be checking out another. So you're like how much sleep are you getting these days? It seems like if I were you, I would constantly be up and like working on something. Or are you getting like any downtime at all, or are you nonstop go right now?
It depends, you know. Press week, we're trying to kind of like spread it out through the week because I still have a day job on the side, and at the same time, and we're also right in the middle of writing the first album for Coffin Feeder, my other band. So it's a lot right now, that's for sure.
That's crazy how like hard you're working and how prolific you are. Because I'm totally the kind of person who like I send one email and then I'm like I really got a lot done today. I should take a rest. You know what I mean? Super cool. But let's talk about Dreadbringer. I'm really excited to check this out with you. Especially because, like we were talking about before the video, like y'all have been a band for what was it? Over 30 years. How long have you been around exactly? I know it's been over 30 years, but
it's not 30 years. Next year it's 30 years, and we've been a band since '95. Don't ask me when in '95 because I'm way too old to remember that shit. But yeah, since '95, so it's been a hot minute.
Yeah, it's wild to me because I hate to do this to you, but I'll be turning 36 this year. So like Aborted and death metal in general is kind of where, even though I wasn't allowed to listen to a lot of it, where things came up. And I'm really excited because your voice, and we're going to dig in more into it soon, I feel like is very iconic and still holds on to a lot, or still maintains a lot of those really cool, really sort of creative and nuanced devices that we heard in death metal of the past. But from what I've heard of this upcoming stuff so far, it's still very new, very nuanced, very interesting to listen to. So I'm very excited to pick your brain about that iconic sound. As far as this song, one question before we jump into it. I always ask my guests, do you want to give me any context or insight as to what I'm going to be singing? Or are you going to make me go in blind? They all make me go in blind, but maybe you'll be the combo breaker here.
I'm not sure what I could tell you about it. I mean, there's a lot of stuff happening. There's also Ben on there, from Shadow Intent. So
yeah,
he's a badass, and makes me look like a choir boy. So there's always that. So prepare for that, I guess, in a way. Now it's absolutely fantastic to have Ben on there. I'm pretty sure you'll hear when he comes in. It's very clear. I'm just excited to see how you react.
Well, yeah, I'll try to put on a good show. I'll do the thumbnail face. You know what I mean? Yeah, I play the game. I know how it all works. But all right, cool. I'm excited for Ben's part too. I'm excited for this whole thing. So let's go ahead. Let's do a nice, awkward YouTube pause and let's check out Dreadbringer by Aborted featuring Ben Duerr. Here we go. Okay, that's actually a really good place to stop. I always pause in the worst possible times, but there's a ton to talk about vocally here. First and foremost, though, I love the cinematic vibe that I'm getting from this song. That's not like getting overly symphonic. I feel like a lot of bands when they add like cinematic tones and things, they pull out the, $10 VST symphonic plugins and they go a little too heavy on it. But this is really cool. Also your drummer with the cymbal play. Oh, phew, that was tasty. It was subtle, but it was in there. But let's talk about you and let's talk about your vocals. So one thing that I think is really interesting about the way that you do vocals, and I think I talked about this in the last video that we put up, maybe it was a couple weeks ago. Is how your placement of your voice really shifts back and forth very, very quickly. Like if I could I'm not going to try to do it because like I can't make vocals that sound like this. So I'm not even going to try it. But if I was to do it with like sort of like a whisper or like a clean voice, like one thing that I think is very iconic with your sound is like sort of like a hyo hyo, like a very forward hyo sound. And it's hard to do that quickly. So I guess the thing I want to hear about is just rather than a targeted question, what's your sort of approach when you're going for like these really dynamic, really fast vocals that still somehow seem like super in control? Is this just second nature to you, or do you pick like, oh, these are the specific syllables that I'm going to rock in the front and rock in the back? If that's too vague, just be like, Mark, you're an idiot. Rephrase that, and I'll do it for you. But tell me about that.
No, that's fine. I mean, the way I approach vocals, or at least, writing everything, is I'll always come up with the parts first, and then I'll actually write the lyrics. So I'll come up with kind of like writing the way I imagine the
Mhm.
vocals would sound in my head, and then try to match words to those sounds that I have in mind. Because to me, it makes much more sense that you're making the words fit what you have in mind rhythmically, because I approach vocals more like an instrument, because it's not clean singing to me.
Mhm.
It's death metal, so it's more of an instrument to add like another layer of depth, or whatever, to the music or texture.
Mhm.
So I'm really looking forward more to, or looking at, how to place things, and then I'll think of words, and I'll try it out in pre-production and see, does it sound cool? Because obviously, sometimes you have a word in there and you're trying to do it with the vocals at that beat, not that it's that fast, but sometimes things sound kind of funky, or
Mhm.
don't sound the way you want them. So I'll just rewrite the whole part and make sure that it kind of like gets the point across that I'm trying to get across,
That makes a
if
lot of
that makes
sense.
sense.
Oh, it totally makes sense, and it's an approach that I'm finding is more and more common the more vocalists I speak to, and it's it's interesting that you'll track it out first yourself to see how things go. That kind of leads me to another question. I think you might be I'm pretty sure you are the most experienced vocalist we've ever had on the channel. I'd have to go back and double check, but I think that is the case. And so, after all of these years, really refining, really sharpening the edge of pretty much every vocal that you have, one of the most common questions that I get, and one of the the questions that I find the most interesting, is when you're doing, let's focus in on maybe like that low, very forward tone. When you're doing these vocals, what does it feel like in your body? Does it feel very smooth and relaxed? Does it feel like constricted and gravelly? How would you describe the sensations in your body when you're doing these really just, I hate to use such a buzzword, but brutal fucking lows? Talk to me about that.
Um, I think it really evolved through years because, when I started doing vocals, there was no, YouTube channels or no, how to scream properly. So you kind of start yelling and try to figure it out along the way. And I think I'm in the case of just sort of throughout the years, really getting to know your body and what works and what doesn't, and kind of like coming off of that. Until recent years, when there's much more knowledge out there and you actually also absorb that and it helps you to level up, so to say, or actually
Mm,
get more control of what you're doing. And I think that really helped a lot in making sure I don't hurt myself or I don't push too hard.
mhm,
Because I also noticed, it's funny that you mention it. If I push too hard, it sounds bad too. So,
mm.
and advice I definitely give to, other vocalists out there is, and I know especially old school people are kind of against it, but in-ears really help with control,
Mhm. Yep.
especially live or in the studio.
Yeah, that was not in-ears are a huge help when we finally embraced them. But this leads me to another question that I really find fascinating. So you mentioned when you push too hard, it doesn't sound as good. Overprojection is something that
Mhm.
will just cut the body of our scream right out from under us. How much value do you place on volume? Like when you're doing a scream, are you thinking like I need this to be really loud, or are you putting more value on the tone or the way you're articulating? Is volume something that's really high priority for you, or maybe not so much?
It used to be, and but in recent years, not so much. I think it's more finding that sweet spot, going from where it
Mm,
kind of sounds like I'm not there yet until okay, now it sounds the way it should be, and
mhm,
just keeping that energy there so you don't like overexert yourself or hurt yourself. So volume used to be kind of important for some reason because I used to be crazy loud, and I think I'm still pretty loud, but it's much more controlled. I think you know
yeah.
whatever gets the best projection and best sound is much more important.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that's a lot of my same approach too. And then last question before we get to this beefy song, but you keep saying things, and I'm like, ooh, that's a really good question. Ooh, that makes me think of something. But do you find that sweet spot is something that you've got it figured out, you know exactly where it is, or is it something that kind of evolves and changes for you over time? Because I know, granted, I've been doing vocals a little less than half the time that you have. But I find that, in 5 to 10 years, my voice is probably going to feel and sort of sit a little bit differently, not in a bad way, in a good way, but I find that it kind of evolves and changes. So are you like locked in, boom, there you go? Or do you find that your voice is kind of evolving and changing as well?
It evolves and changes because as a vocalist, I mean, at least for myself, you're always trying to find ways to do what you're doing a little better, like get a little bit better at your craft or whatnot,
Mm-hmm.
and try different sounds, different tongue positions or whatnot, and mouth shapes to see how it impacts everything, and then see do you have to like add distortion more or less
Mm,
just to see how it impacts everything. So I do think it changes, of course. But the fact of doing like a proper warm up to really like find the right spot and the right amount of push, I think is important.
mm.
And it also changes. Like if you're on tour, like the first couple of days, you're gonna warm up more, and it's gonna take a little bit more. And your weekend, just like you're done in 5 minutes. It's that's how it is for me at least.
Sure. I mean, that's a common sentiment I've heard before. So that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, very insightful. Let's get back to this banger of a song here. I'm excited to see where it goes. I mean, shoot, we're only a minute and a half in. So awesome. Here we go. I want to pause it right there because that's a vocal that you do that I really like. I really like it. So what you have there is this is more for anybody watching because of course you know what you have there. You did it at the microphone. Um but what you have there is like a really nice, very bright scream with a little bit of voice in it. It's got a little bit of that like underneath, and the distortion. One thing I really like about your voice in general, which is quite different than my voice, is that your distortion is very TV staticky, very like, it's smooth, which is, it's kind of an interesting description to use for such an aggressive sound. It's like smooth. It's like it's like a very drinkable whiskey. Like, yeah, it still hits like whiskey, but it's not gonna like kick your ass in that way. Um, Talk to me about that vocal. I'm just kind of interested to hear the way that it feels, the way that you use it. Pretty broad here, but it's a really cool sound, and I'm just interested to hear your approach and how you found it and all that good stuff.
I think how you're talking about the more mid-range part that has it's not like screechy highs, but highs that have a little bit more of the human voice in it, if you
Exactly.
want to call it that.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that was kind of how I approached highs back in the day, and kind of being inspired sort of by Jeff Walker, Speed Sprit from Soilwork. That
Yeah, yeah.
that also kind of has this like normal voice in there, and it was somewhere in between like the really high screams or the lows. I think it's for me it was kind of finding that transitionary point where it definitely doesn't have as much distortion and it has more actual voice in it than the lows, for example. So I kind of like messed around with that until I found this thing that kind of sounds like
Hmm.
there's been these singers that always influenced me throughout my career, but I always try to kind of do my own thing with it and rather than just emulate completely. So I do
Right.
think it's important for vocalists to have their own tone.
Well, I
If that
think
makes
you
sense.
it makes sense perfectly, and I think that that's something you've definitely been very successful with because I think even for people who listen to like a lot of death metal, right? Which I'm not trying to you know say like you guys are stuck in like 90s death metal. You've evolved in a lot of different ways, and I think some of these songs that I'm hearing now, I think I don't know. I'm enjoying where I hear the band going, but for a lot of people who listen to death metal, old and new, like I feel like they hear Aborted and they're like, "That's Aborted. That's Sven. Like 100% correct." Um, and a lot of it is for those like sort of iconic vocal markers that I've pointed out so far. Um, I have some other questions, but I want to actually hang on to them until a little bit later. Let's keep going unless you have anything you want to add.
There was Ben before. I don't know if that jumped out.
So I thought so. I was like that sure sounds like a Ben Low. That sure sounds like a Ben Low to me. In that case, let's go ahead and let's talk about this now. This is actually the
Mhm.
question I was the most excited to ask you coming up onto this interview. So, you know, as someone who's been not just doing vocals, but a vocalist, a musician for such a long time. And, if you look at the roster of a lot of these guest vocalists that you have, it's a mix of old and new, right? You had Despised Icon, and you've also got Ben, who's a younger guy like me, and you've got Johnny Ciardullo, who's a younger guy like me, and so I'm just kind of interested to get your view on how vocals have changed over such a long period of time because like you go back and you listen to music from 96, 97, 98, and then 2 years ago, even now, it's so different. So what's just your view and your opinion on how metal vocals have changed and warped and evolved over such a long period of time?
I think it's evolved in the way that there's a lot more knowledge out there. So there's a lot
Mm,
more knowledge out there for people to get started and to kind of find their way, but there's also so much more variation happening, at least in the grand scale of extreme music. I mean, if you look at old school death metal, it'll be a lot more, linear, but that
mhm,
absolutely fits, what that style is going for. But if you look at vocals from back in the 90s, I think there was just a lot of trial and error and people just, being the anger man and yelling and seeing what comes out versus now there's so much technique involved, that you get so many different sounds going on, and there's so much more vocal variation in bands and in songs or records in general. And I find that it's really interesting. It's really cool to see, and it keeps you on your game and making sure that you don't get stuck behind in the 90s.
yeah, um I agree, and I think you're right. It's the main thing that seems to have changed, or I suppose maybe a foundational thing that seems to have changed is you know, the knowledge that's out there. Um, so that being said, let's say you could go back in time. You could go back to, like, Sven in 1990, 1993, when you were like listening to this music and being like, "Oh, I want to be a vocalist," right? Um, if you had the opportunity, would you go back in time and give yourself a lot of the knowledge that's around today, or would you say no, 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 I'd keep it exactly as it was? What would you do if you were given that opportunity?
I would 100% go back in time and give myself that advice.
No
You
way,
wouldn't,
really?
yeah, absolutely, because you learn how to not hurt yourself. And back in the day, there's very little technique involved. It was just kind of figure it out by yourself.
Mhm.
And a lot of times get hurt while doing so. So I think for that reason only, it's important. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've asked similar questions to other vocalists before, and usually they're like, "No, I wouldn't change anything because I am who I am today and it shaped me and all this stuff." So it's interesting that you're like, "Nah, man, I'd go back and I'd fix some things." And I can relate to what you're saying because, when I came up, we were just starting. Like, Melissa Cross had released the Zen of Screaming, and that was it. I remember we used to all get together, and I never did this. But we used to all get together, and you were really good if after you finished a set, like, you tasted blood in your mouth. People would be like, "Oh, that's awesome, dude. Hell yeah." And now it's just like, so it really is interesting how it's changed. That's wild. I did not anticipate that answer, but that's fun. That's super fun. Let's go ahead and keep going. This is a certified banger so far for sure. Oh, oh, Jesus Christ. So that was sick. So I'm gonna just gush a little bit because that was awesome. One thing that a lot of people do with features is, and sometimes you have to do it this way, so it's not like a criticism of other people. They send, and I've done this before, like I've done this when I do features for other people because it's just how it works. They send the song, they say, hey, your part's from 1 minute to 1 minute and 45 seconds. They record it, boom, you send it back. That, however, if anybody is watching this and you're familiar with, well, anybody watching this is going to be familiar with both you guys in Shout of Intent. Duh. But you know that very much, to me at least, to me it seems like that was a very calculated, very thoughtful use of his voice. You had him come in, I mean, I know he was in earlier, but you had him come in during a breakdown, right? Which is very much like a more modern sound. And then you had him doing his disgusting lows, and then you were doing your like highs over top of it and kind of moving around each other. So that was a very thoughtful feature. And I don't have a question. That was just dope. And I wanted to say that was fucking dope. So sick. That was so cool. Man, that really was awesome. What was the process of, let me think about this question so it makes sense. What was the process of when you were setting up this feature? How did you facilitate that collaborative process? Was it easy to do? Did you work with him? Did you already have the idea? Because like that was one of the coolest features I've heard in a very long time. And like I said, it sounded very intentional. How did that whole process work?
Well, I mean, I've worked with Ben before, so I know what he can do, which is a lot because he's a badass. But next to that, I think I recorded, and this is the same for all the features on this album. I recorded bass tracks for everything, but then sent some parts and highlighted like, okay, I think it'd be great to have you on here. But if you have different ideas, if you think you should be on any other parts, or you want to just change the parts, just do your thing. I want you to sound like you, and just go with it. And then we can see, we'll work it out in the mix and all that. And the part before the breakdown was also Ben. There were actually no vocals there, and he just kind of like recorded himself. Like, I have this idea to add my voice there. What do you think? I was like, yeah, fantastic. Let's just go for it. And then in the breakdown itself, it was meant to be Ben, but we kind of blended in, the parts where the highs go over the lows, and then it comes together with his lows. That was how it was written out, but I think it really works well together, that it's like a mixture of both of us.
Yeah, it was masterfully done. I absolutely loved the way that the vocals were composed, that they were moving in and out of those like those guitar, that was sick. That's the part, like the song is amazing through and through. That's the part that I guarantee that people are going to be listening to. They'll be like, oh, and they're going to scroll back. They're going to be like, whoa, because there's some seriously cool musicianship on everybody's end there as well. I'm going to save my question for after we listen a little bit more. But yeah, that was awesome. Let's keep going. Oh, it's gonna be good. It's gonna be good. The copyright police are going to be mad that I let so many long sections play, but I don't care. I had to do it. Cuz like the that last part we listened to is so cool. I love on your high screams, and I this is something that I find, like, for me personally, not only as a vocal coach but a vocal instructor as well, for me is a signifier of somebody who's like really refined what they're doing versus somebody who's like just learning. But the way that you give your highs the same attention and love that you give your low, like really low screams, and I'm talking about these screeching soaring highs. You know, a lot of times people will just, here's their high, they throw it out there and they're kind of done. But you were like chewing on them, and I could, like, at certain places your vocal tract was like super narrow, and you're like really just letting the scream like slither out, and it's like venomous sounding, which I really think is interesting. um I've noticed that, at least in this song, it was something that was used a little bit less than that low and that mid. Is that something that was like a conscious choice? You're like, hey, I want to drive with this mid and low. Or talk to me about your choice of using the high a little bit less, because it's tasty, and I'm like, oh man, put some more of that on my dish. So talk to me about that.
I think it really is, when I write the vocals, it's more like the vibe I want to go for, and try to find the right vocal parts for every, bit, if that
Mm,
makes sense. Like,
yeah,
I use the screechy highs, or the disgusting voice, as I call it. I use it on mainly like the more black metal sounding parts, because it really complements the guitar work,
sure.
I feel, or when there's supposed to be like some extra aggression driven into it. It really depends on the song. It's funny because Dave Otero really wanted me to do that as much as possible on the record, so he tried to be like, "Yeah, let's add that on top. Yeah, add it on top. Add it on top." So a lot of it, like the dubbings, are actually, that voice, because it kind of works well to make it kind of gross sounding with the lows.
Mm.
But depending on the song on the record, it gets used much more or less. Really
Yeah,
depends.
you know, that's making me think, like, so with my life, I'm a dad, I'm a business owner, I'm in my own band writing our own album. I never listen to albums anymore because I don't have time. But now I'm like, dang it, I'm gonna have to carve out some time to listen to this album. Farts. How am I gonna find the time to do that? Because from what I've heard so far, it's gonna be absolutely sick. Um, there's really one last thing. Let me check in on the technology side of things here. Um, there's really one last thing I kind of want to talk about here. Um, and it's that one thing that I try to express to a lot of people, and I think it comes from to be honest, I don't know what it comes from, but there's this idea that everything is a false chord vocal or everything is a fry vocal, and that's kind of it, right? And so sometimes people will say, like, using you as an example, they might be like, oh, is Sven a false chord or a fry vocalist? And I'm like, that's like pointing at a cake and being like, is that eggs? And I was like, well, there's eggs in it. You know what I mean? So this question is kind of broad, and building on something you said earlier. Obviously, I'm with you. I think that the vocal knowledge we have today is good, given my career. But how do you feel? Tell me if this question is a little too broad, and I'll try to refine it for you. How do you feel about that false chord fry dichotomy? Is it even something you think about very much? Especially, no, not at all. Have you ever been asked that question, like, hey, do you false chord or do you do fry vocals?
Not really. I mean,
Really?
honestly, the weirdest thing I have, especially like back in the 90s or whatever, when we started out, the most asked question was like, "Oh, he's using a harmonizer." That's like what used to be the big question back in the day. Oh,
Yeah.
it's all effects. It's all a harmonizer or a pitch shifter or whatnot. That's the most frequent question I used to have. The whole fray or false chord thing, not really.
Mm.
Not really. Nor do I really care, or would I know the difference, to be honest.
Maybe it's just because of what I do, but I feel like that question is like and again, it's just my experience, but that question is like the most asked question, and it's one of my least favorites because like you're talking about, a lot of times, and like you've kind of alluded to over this interview, it's less about like, okay, let me lock in this specific technique and what works, what feels right, what creates the best sound,
Mhm.
and what do you do with that, right? Um, and I think in your case, there's this really nice mixture of all sorts of things going on. In fact, um, you'd be a good person to get a scope down your nose, looking down there at the different things you're doing, because like I said, your sound is super unique. Um, I also wanted to ask you, and this is a question I've started asking a little bit more. Have you ever had any like oh, let me think of how to word this. Okay, so another question I wanted to ask you. So it's that ADD brain, that ADHD brain. Sometimes my brain is like, and switching off, and it's like, oh,
Hey,
this is
join the
perfect.
club, dude.
It's great. You know, honestly, what it was is there was above my backdrop here. There was like a little ant crawling, and all of a sudden, my brain was just like, ooh, that's fascinating. Yeah, exactly, just gone. Um, but you know, when it comes to vocal health and vocal injury and things, earlier in the call you were talking about like, oh, you know, I make sure that I don't hurt myself. And a lot of times when I'm talking to vocalists, especially newer vocalists, they have their own approach to vocal health and vocal hygiene. What are some things that you do, especially coming from a time when there was a lot less I publicly known about it to now? What are some things that you've done to protect your voice and that you do to create these crazy sounds without waking up the next day sounding like this?
Well, as dumb as it sounds, it's for me, it's trying to stay away from things that dehydrate your voice.
Yep.
Drink a lot of water, hydrate a lot, and sleep. Sleep's very important for me. I know if I slept like shit, and if I slept like shit for like a bunch of days in a row, it's not gonna be good.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that's really important. And then just knowing, know your voice and know not to push when, even if you want to, because you're really in the moment.
Mm.
Sometimes that's really hard when you're performing and you got the adrenaline going and everything, and it's a good show, and you just kind of want to push extra hard because the mood's there. But that's kind of like the brain versus the heart that you got to be like, remember, mm-mm-mm, don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah, I
it,
know.
in-ears also really help, to be honest, because when you're relying on regular monitors, a lot of the times, even if you have your own sound engineer,
Mm,
sound will be kind of shitty depending on what's available to you. Whereas when you have your in-ears, it's a controlled environment, so you don't have to push as hard as to, for example, when the monitors are crappy or they give out during the show, you don't hear yourself anymore. The
mhm.
natural instinct is to push so you hear yourself.
Yeah.
Well, that's exactly what you shouldn't be doing. You should stay in control, but that's, I think, something that kind of comes with experience and trying to get, self-control in a way.
Yeah, that's actually a really good thing you're calling out, and, it's one of the most important skills that I think really any vocalist, not even just a harsh vocalist, like a clean singer could have as well, is understanding, even if you can't name the feelings, understanding the sensation, because, like, we haven't played in a very long time, but that's happened to me before on stage. In ears cut out and you're like, oh, and you're not at like a super nice, you're in a basement venue basically, so the sound is terrible. And in those moments, like, what I had to lean on was just the way it felt. I was like, okay, this feels right, and so I'm screaming by sensation. um which is part of the reason I asked you at the beginning. I was like, what does it feel like? You know, what sort of sensations do
Mhm.
you have? It's hard to name for sure. um and it's interesting, earlier you said that there were people who are like anti in-ear. I've never heard that before, but then I guess different people, I suppose. What's the reason that people don't like in-ears? That's interesting to me.
I think, I mean, it's a little easier for me because I'm follically impaired. I have no hair. So I don't have the hair messing up the cables or anything. But with people with
Mm,
long hair, I know that can be an issue. Another thing, and actually why I stayed away from in-ears for a long time, is that the fear of being isolated from what's happening around you.
oh, I see.
Uh, Not sure if it's a fear or more so of you're afraid that you don't vibe with the crowd, or you don't know what's going on, or everything is very direct and you can hear every little mistake that's happening, not only your own but the other band members. So um, it's kind of tricky not to get how do you say, like, sidetracked or get pulled out of the show when you hear stuff that's not right.
Mm,
I know some bands are just playing to tracks live, so they can focus only on their performance.
mm.
But we just do the live thing. We're all just playing live to each other, and it's just kind of like a switch you got to flip and know, like, all right, someone fucked up. It's okay. Nobody heard, and just go on. But at the same time, if you're feeling a little raw and it is very clearly in your ears, and it doesn't sound exactly the way you want it to sound, it's kind of hard to get over that feeling and get into the show, even if out front maybe nobody else notices because they don't have it dry and direct in their ears.
Yeah, and we're all our own worst critics anyway. So you know that like
Absolutely.
that's a good point. You hear like one flat note, or you go to do a scream, and it sounds like and you're like, oh. Shit. Chances of people noticing are very small. But then you have to like be like, okay, I'm gonna put that over here. I'm gonna put that on the side. I'm not gonna like live in that moment. That makes a lot of sense actually. Well, song was an absolute joy to listen to. I know that's kind of a funny thing to say about like metal. It was a joy to listen to, but that's the best way I can describe it. I'm really excited. Just a couple last things, and I feel like we're pretty good. What I always want to get this information from anybody I have on the channel. What would be some of your advice to people who, they're just getting into metal, they're just getting into vocals, and they want to do stuff, because sometimes people will, and I know that this is never our intention, but people listen to bands and voices like yours and they'll be like inspired, but also intimidated. They'll be like, oh man, how could I possibly ever get on that level? What are some pieces of advice you'd give for new vocalists out there who are wanting to get started?
I just say, just take the leap. If it's something that you believe that you should be doing, that you will enjoy doing, then that's the main reason to be doing it. Because, like any musician out there, there's always someone that's crazier and better or whatnot, whatever you want to call it technically. Yeah,
Mm.
the main thing to me is do something out of passion. If you believe you should be doing this, then just take the steps to get started. Because everybody had to get started at some point. We all had to get there. We all had to, wrestle ourselves through any type of insecurities or whatnot. I don't think that should hold anyone back. There's a lot of awesome channels and ways that you can get good knowledge to get started, and people that can help you if you need help. So don't be afraid to reach out and just do your own thing and have fun with it. I mean, that's ultimately the most important.
That's I love that too, because that's something I mention to my students all the time. Like they'll be like, they'll be working so hard they get kind of miserable, and I'm like, yo, like step back, just have some fun with it. Like let yourself just do this because it's enjoyable. If you mess up a vocal, fine. If you're going for false chord but it turns into something else, fine. So just that sort of foundational advice of do it because you're passionate about it, I think is one of the most valuable things, outside of like, a very specific technique. Um and then last thing for anybody who's watching this and might just be learning about Aborted, maybe they're part of the younger crowd like me. What are some things that you want to drop? What are some announcements? I always leave it to you because I don't want to accidentally say something that's not supposed to be said yet. So what are some things that people can be excited for and coming up in the future of Aborted in your music?
When is this getting dropped?
18th.
18th. Okay. Um, Well, we're gonna be tour. So we go on tour right now in Europe with Carnifex, Revocation, and Vex. That's starting the day after the album drops on the 16th of March,
Mm,
and we should be over in the US and Canada in June. So we'll be out there. I can't really say who it's with, only that there will be multiple guests present on that tour, so maybe people
nice.
can guess.
Ah,
And we're
yeah.
not headlining, so you can try to see what it is, and then we'll be doing some stuff. We'll see.
Awesome.
Plans are still open.
That's exciting. Fingers crossed for an Arizona date. Fingers crossed for an Arizona date. That'd be awesome. Well, Sven, I think that that was a lot of fun. I really appreciate you being here on the channel and talking with me about vocals. I think that this is going to be super valuable, not just for new vocalists, but old vocalists as well. People have been doing this for any amount of time. And for all of you, thank you for watching. Thank you for checking out this song. Stay tuned. Listen to more Aborted. Many thanks. Much love. I'm out.